Thank you. Thank you very much. I keep my bottle of water here. Yes, and I will keep it like this. So yes, I'm not going to give too many explanations. It sounds terrible the way you presented it, very complicated and very boring. And as it's good because it's the title of my speech, let's make the future boring. So it's a bit, not very shake up the order kind of title. So it was a bit provocative. All the more since I'm going to start. I will tell you about the future during this presentation. And tomorrow starts yesterday, as you know. When I was little. I was being told that if I was a good girl, I would go to paradise. And I used to think that it was not a very good project, because to me, paradise seemed very boring, because I imagined some place where you would do nothing, nothing would happen, and it would last forever. So it's a bit strange that today I would be sort of advocating the idea of having a boring future. In fact, what do I mean by boring? It's, of course, a provocative title. I mean, in fact, that I've been involved as the president of LEAP, and for 10 years, you mentioned the fact that we've been analyzing the global systemic crisis. And contrary to lots of specialists, here I could be called a specialist of the crisis. I'm fed up with crisis. So I would like a future in which we minor this, activity that we have of making crisis. So what I mean by boring is what would be boring for what category of people? Journalists? Yes, they will find very boring to have less crisis. Historians, filmmakers. So yes, from this point of view, I'm going to tell you about a boring future. But in fact, I'm mostly going to handle this concept of crisis and see why I want less of it and how can we have less of it. Can we try to have less of it? First of all, let's try to define crisis. There are many ways to do so, and I'm not pretending to have the final definition of crisis, but the way I see it after 10 years following the global systemic crisis is that somehow it's a lack of a capacity of anticipation. We live in a world, it's always been the case, where change happens constantly. We are in a reality that is an evolving reality, and we need to adapt to it. And strangely, in our modern civilized societies, we have different ways of addressing this time change. And until now, it's been quite not very exciting. So the first method to address change is to not look at it. So you close your eyes and you take the future in your head. So that's a very bad system, and let's forget this one. But we have another method, which is the one we are still in, even though I hope we are changing. It's the one it's the way our systems, our societies, have been trying to block time, to get out of reality, to shield themselves, to protect themselves from change. And here we have a picture of, which is very emblematic for me of the way we tackled history in the past and in the 20th century, in the 19th century already, and still a little bit now, by building institutions, states, static, blocks to everybody behind walls and things, establishment, listen at the word. All this is about blocking time. It's about not addressing this reality, this changing reality. And we have a very good case now, which is indeed this global systemic crisis. I will just give an example, but it's a very key example. The way we analyze this global systemic crisis since we started with GEAB, as you mentioned, in 2006, is in fact, we summarize it as follows. It's a switch from a Western-centered world to a multipolar world. Okay, that's reality. It's changing. It's partly because we enabled, as a Western world, to contribute to this change. So we played our role in this evolution. And now, strangely, as we can see, we have a tendency from the Western world to be afraid of this change and to sort of say, oh my God, these Chinese, these Russians, what do they want? They are going to challenge our might, our capacity to do what we want, so let's make a block. Americans, Europeans, Australians, but lots of them are more or less thinking, oh, I don't like so much this bloc. But Europe and America are doing quite a good job closing up more and more, looking at these bricks in particular as something threatening and competing. And so I don't think this is a very good way to see change, really. And today, we have a society which is, in fact, this global systemic crisis is also about a major shift in social engineering, in the way societies function. We are at the age of networks, dynamics. So how do you expect to escape from time, really? Impossible. Time has accelerated, complexity is enormous, you can do things about, and we see our leaders too, completely desperate. I want to control things. No, you won't control things. You are now in a reality that is constantly evolving, and what you must do is become aware that you are part of this reality. And you too can change. And you can adapt, you can look at this future coming ahead as a positive thing, not a positive thing, a thing coming, which can become positive if you do the right things, if you make the right decisions, but which can become nightmare if you decide to block it and create conflicts and end up in war like we had in the 20th century, and like today we all know there is a risk on the table. So we must change the method and address change in a more dynamic way. And this is where we at LEAP have also been developing a method which we call political anticipation. I'm not going to go deep into the details of that, but one way to summarize this method is to say we can look at the future without being afraid of it. Of course, we old people, I know it's full of young people, and so you have a different perspective on the future. But when you grow old, it's true that the future, maybe I'm not going to be there very long, things like that. So you sort of start getting a bit worried about this thing coming. So now let's look at the future positively in terms of collectivity. It's full of opportunities, it's full of challenges, it's full of risks, of obstacles, but all this can be positively tackled and for a better future with less crisis, with problems that are seen beforehand and that don't come up on your table as a major crisis that has no good solution anymore, for instance. So political anticipation is really about embracing change, accepting that we are part of this moving reality, trying to understand what's coming up, what are the big characteristics of this future, what are the big trends? What is it bringing? And making decisions today in order to address and contribute to change ourselves, as you said, ourselves, at every level of society. Here I'm presenting you Franck Biancheri. You pronounced it beautifully, thank you. Not my name, by the way. But Franck Biancheri did well. So he's the inventor of this method of political anticipation. He passed away, unfortunately, 2.5 years ago. That's how I'm now more or less one of the centers. We have another very central person to the networks here, who is Pepe Compagne Morales. We are a whole network trying to bring further his heritage, even though he's not here anymore. So Franck Biancheri invented this method because he himself had this capacity. He had a mind which consisted of looking in the future all the time. The future belongs to me, I'm part of it, and so I have a right to look at it and to decide and to build projects, create networks, create organizations to try to contribute to a better addressing this future. Let me just use one image so that maybe I won't be boring, I promise, too long about describing what political anticipation is about, but we have the one very easy image that we like to use. Political anticipation is like a boat, a sailboat at sea, that wants to go to a harbor, and that has to deal with waves and winds and streams. And if it doesn't do anything, the sailorman and the sailboat, these winds and waves and streams will never take it to the harbor. Never, that's for sure. But if the sailorman understands these waves and winds and streams, that's understanding the reality, the evolving reality. If he makes the right decision, putting the sails like he wants, these winds and waves and streams become his ally to reach the harbor. And that's what political anticipation is about. It's a very simple method. Why? Because we think that political anticipation needs to be spread around to everybody. Policymakers, okay, they have their tools, But policymakers in our society, do you think they are still going to be effective in changing society, in adapting society very long? No. We live today in a society which is organic and in which every individual has a tremendous capacity to influence reality. And so for this reason, this allowance, being allowed to look at the future, must be shared among all of us, because we all have decisions to make which regard the future. And the combination of all our micro decisions, or not micro decisions, by the way, will contribute to what I call the boring future, an organic global society naturally adapting to change. Social Darwinism. Let's hope that in this global society, which is completely interconnected, with people who give themselves the right of tackling the future, which used to be something reserved to gods, to magics, priests, or very powerful people. Now the future must belong to everybody. Let's democratize the future. And then we can have this. I know it's boring, so we are going to have less crisis. I'm sorry for that. And I just want to add one more thing, is that I seemed very theoretical, maybe, now, but we are not just theorists, we do act. So we not only try to understand what's coming up, but we have projects, we act, we create events. And here you have a picture of something that happened 3 weeks ago, and which is connected to this global systemic crisis and the resistance of the West to address this emerging multipolar world. We anticipated the fact that there would be that kind of reaction, and in 2010 we launched a project called Europe Breaks, oblige the Western world, at least part of the Western world, the one we can sort of have an influence on, to look at this emerging world. Let's make connections. So we've had this project for many years, since 2010, that's not many, many years, but it was a rather confidential project. And 3 weeks ago, we organized something which is really something very important in our history. We organized the first EuroBRICS Young Leaders Summit. And we had more than 100 students, not students, youth and students, very high level. They were selected. We had 500 candidates for that, coming from China, Europe, Brazil, Russia, all the places. People who were not used to being in contact with that kind of group, who used to be either on very international grounds or very national. And it was a fantastic event. And we gave ourselves not only the idea of, okay, let's talk to each other, but let's change the world. And it was amazing how, and of course, there was more elaboration, not just let's change the world, but it was organized discussions. It was amazing how these people, they were in this room, and I was thinking sometimes I'm completely, not paranoid, megalomaniac, change the world. Yes, we are 100 young people from different countries, but everybody felt that it was possible. Yes, today with the internet, with the capacity to get organized at every level, it's not more complicated to organize an event like that than sometimes to organize a local event. It's the same tools anyway. Well, it costs a bit more to bring people in the same place, but you don't need to bring them in the same place all the time. You can have constantly exchanges, which is what happens now as an after event of this Congress. We are building a EuroBRICS youth platform. We are building a EuroBRICS magazine. They are doing that, all them. And so this shows how we can, with the youth, it's important to use youth, that you play your role, because the future, it's easier for you to see it positively. So we collectively need the youth to implement this project. Thank you.